Hi, and welcome back. I hope everybody took advantage of the break because this next session is much longer than the other ones. It's going to go 55 minutes. This is the Canadian Underground Forum. Although with the content over this today and tomorrow, it's more of a North American, or actually you could call it an international underground forum. There will be plenty of Canada-centric content. As there has been today, there will be tomorrow. But to emphasize the word forum, the next session is a panel. And Prashant Shukle is going to guide a panel, himself and 5 panelists, to get some open dialogue going, talking about the subjects today. Some of the presenters are in the panel, talking over the state of things, where we're at. As Jeff Zeiss mentioned earlier, there's just been so much happening in only the past 2 years, and certainly in technology, but now policy and standards. So Prashant, take it away, and we'll keep track of the questions that come in along the way, and we'll see where we are on time to jump in and answer those. So thank you, and take it away, Prashant.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Gavin, and welcome everybody to this Underground Forum. I'm very excited to be your moderator today and to get to ask the esteemed panelists a series of questions on your behalf. And as in previous sessions, if you have any questions, please post them, and we will certainly get to them. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists, Rob Martindale. Some of you may have heard his presentation already. He's with the state of Colorado, and he's the utilities program manager there. Gord Reynolds, who I've come to know over the last couple of weeks, who's got a fantastic vision to share with all of us today with respect to Infrastructure Ontario and the work that they're doing there. Jennifer Ross is leading efforts within the federal government to push the issue of a national underground registry, or at least a federal underground registry. And my heart goes out to you, Jennifer, because trying to lead the federal geospatial platform for a number of years left me somewhat scarred, but emotionally and intrinsically fulfilled in some ways. And Alon Gat, who is the operations lead on this broader initiative, will sit as a panelist as well. And of course, Neil Brammall at the Geospatial Commission of the United Kingdom. And I've always been very impressed with what the UK is doing, not just with the Commission, but specifically with respect to their National Underground Registry. And certainly it provides lessons learned for us in Canada, as does the Colorado example. And I'm sure that most of you aren't here to hear me speak, because our colleagues have got some absolutely fantastic presentations to give today. And I will turn it over to them. And what I will hope to do is get Rob to kick us off with the Colorado experience. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, you know, like I said, most everybody had seen, well, hopefully some had seen my presentation this morning, but again, for those that haven't, you know, in Colorado, we had our legislative changes in 2018 that really has been driving a lot of the changes for Colorado, and the way we're handling, you know, the way we're handling our utilities and investigation. You know, a lot of what Jim spoke about just previous to this with ASCE 38 standards, you know, is also part of our team, or our legislation that is unique, that it's tied our legislation to national standards for depicting utilities, which is very unique in the fact that we have a legislation or a law that's out there that's mandating the use of something that's adopted by the industry, and it gives an expectation for what the deliverables are going to be for our program. You know, we look at it in Colorado as the subsurface utility information that's coming in is just one part of an overall utility program. And, you know, it starts with that information, but then it also is leveraged throughout the entire pre-construction process to build plans, to coordinate with utility companies, to develop relocation plans for our projects, develop engineering design recommendations and changes, and then we obviously move that into construction. And for us, it's about managing the entire process. But the legislation that happened in 2018 definitely affected our pre-construction deliverables. It's also given our contractors an expectation when they see a bid package that they have more information to rely on when they're looking at the risk to their construction activity. So we feel like overall that managing utility projects this way is actually reducing, our bid costs and contingencies that go into this kind of world that, contractors have to look at those plans, and if there's unknowns in there, they have to bid it accordingly. And we know that there's high contingencies on utility plans that are just subpar or just unknowns in the contract. The contractors know they're going to have to deal with those during construction. So yeah, it's very unique in Colorado. We've taken not only the mandates and regulations that are out there, but we've also, like you've seen, we've inserted technology on locating and capturing the data and capturing it so that we can reuse it, snapshot in time. But it is something we can use for future investigations. And so we're trying to look at it holistically, and as an agency, we really feel like we're taking the path that will benefit our projects, and as stewards to public funds and taxpayer dollars. We feel like that, overall we're going to be able to deliver more projects with the money and the savings that we have. So thank you. I certainly look forward to answering any specific questions or anything else related to what we're up to in Colorado. So.
There we go. Thank you very much, Rob. And now I'll turn it over to Gord Reynolds.
Well, thanks, Prashant. Really happy to be here and happy to have an opportunity to share some of what we're doing with colleagues. We're not unique in that we struggle with the challenge related to, finding, developing treatments for, and often relocating utilities to get infrastructure built. That's not an Ontario problem. It's not a Canada problem. It's not even a North American problem. It's a challenge that everybody has when they're dealing with large infrastructure projects. But we have taken what we think to be a fairly unique approach. We've stolen from ideas from Colorado and from other geographies who lead the way, but we think we've taken a fairly aggressive approach with respect to how we work with our utility partners and our private sector partners who help us build this infrastructure to enhance the coordination regime. My colleague, Alon Gat from Ernst & Young, runs that program for us with our sister agency of the government, Metrolinx, which is responsible for regional rail and light transit development and operation. Infrastructure Ontario has a fairly broad role. We're the real estate partner for the government of Ontario. We're also the lender on behalf of the government of Ontario. But the group that I'm most focused on working with is really around developing commercial projects and major projects like new hospitals, new courthouses, new highways, and new transit builds. And as of late, as I think we all can appreciate, getting broadband infrastructure built to support those that are forced to learn, get care, or work from home what's been probably one of the most difficult years we've all had in recent memory. So, these projects, we'll talk most about the subway projects because that's where we've got the most teeth in our legislation. We have passed laws here that compel both the government and our private sector partners, including utilities, to work together in a way that's new, that puts very clear expectations on the parties, very clear timelines, with what we refer to as backstops, but very strong penalties for non-performance. And in the case of the regulated utilities, those penalties include provisions that stipulate that those costs cannot be passed on to ratepayers if those are regulated utilities. So for the utilities that are regulated by the province of Ontario, which would be your gas distribution, electricity distribution principally, those utilities, should they be found to be out of compliance, would be their shareholders would be responsible for the costs associated with recouping the damages that the province is responsible for as a result of either an act or a non-act that resulted in damages. So it's a very interesting time. We're working closely with utility. They're very engaged, which is nice. They've taken the legislation very seriously, and they are great partners. And what we've found probably most important, and Alon, I'm sure, can speak to this because he's dealing with it firsthand, is that the legislation was really something that we developed and hoped to put away and very, very rarely, if ever, need to refer to. But it gave us very strong legislative authorities and powers that compelled everybody to come to the table and work together. They knew what the risk was of not doing that. And we've seen them very clearly step up and work with us to improve the outcomes, which is really encouraging. And we're taking those early signals from transit. And Prashant, you and I have talked about this a little bit. We're applying it to other infrastructure projects as well, most notably our big broadband expansion program that we've just recently announced.
Well, that's terrific. I'm going to bring Alon in, and I'm going to use some of the chair's prerogative here to do a bit of a redirect, in part because I think there's such a profound opportunity that I think we see before us. And if there's anybody that's just joined in to take in this session, maybe Alon, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit because we're going to be chatting with Jennifer, or Jennifer is going to be chatting fairly soon. If you were in an elevator with a minister, and if you wanted to pitch this idea that we're trying to build here, and you had about 2 minutes to sell the idea, what is the vision and what's the sales pitch that you would use, and you have used in Ontario around the Metrolinx piece, around the Infrastructure Ontario piece, and what would you say are going to be the massive benefits that accrue to the Canadian economy as well as to the various jobs downstream?
Oh, that's a big ask. So first of all, hello everyone, and thank you. I certainly can echo everything that I've heard Rob and Gord speak about, and Gord and I work very, very closely. Our programs are aligned, and the EY program is here to support the initiatives. That support begins quite early on with the vision of this concept, and the concept is based on a few key tenets. First, the transformational idea that we've gone from mission critical to life or death. And I say that very, very seriously, in that it's not just about coordinating the relocation of assets, but it's enabling a single source of truth to all parties involved. And that single source of truth does a number of things. First and foremost, to echo what Rob said, it eliminates a lot of that contingency, that unknown in the beginning. It also ensures that not only do we get good bids, reliable bids, but it paves the way for what used to be a combative and legislatively heavy relationship between parties to true collaboration. And that collaboration is based almost entirely on that single source of truth of information. So being able to attain that information and present it in such a way that it's universally available to all parties who are interested, either directly or through a number of services, is key to this. Of course, the benefits of this are that collaborative approach, which means increased efficiency in projects and delivery to the public in terms of services. Again, looking at Metrolinx is a fine example of the immense construction projects underway to enable transportation in one of the largest and fastest growing cities in North America. Beyond that, we're looking at the application of that same legislation, but again, that single source of data and the collaborative model to support all linear projects, and again, to broadband. So I say it's become life and death beyond mission criticality, because we will hang a number of incredible initiatives on these tenets. Things like next generation emergency calling in 911, e-healthcare in light of the global pandemic and the global need to reach all communities equally and to serve them equally.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I mean, I'm just listening to all three of you. I picked up several items. Not only are our bids going to be much more accurate in terms of the contracting process, we're going to get true collaboration out of this. We're going to get faster project delivery, ostensibly because we have truth in terms of what's located underground. We're saving money to the national economy, as well as potentially to federal or provincial dollars that are going into these massive infrastructure projects. We're enabling smart expenditures, which could mean reallocation in the future, as I picked up on your last point. And then the digital platforms piece, you know, just to tie it back to the previous presentation on digital twins, you know, having that sense of accuracy. Jennifer, do you think that all of these components are going to come together to help you out? And what are you doing at the federal government level? Maybe you can share with us.
I think that we reflect, we have a lot in common with everything that's being said here today. There's not a lot of difference in what I can add to the conversation, to be honest with you. What the government is doing right now, federally, what we've taken on is that what initiated us with, you know, going through and actually joining in with the Ontario One Call centers and all of them across Canada was the legislation that they wanted to make at a national level. And so we decided to go in a more of a parallel view in that respect, and not discount the legislation that wanted to be in place, but to create something that would be mirror it without having the legislation for it. Because provincially, we already have legislation that would cover a lot of these aspects. And if we put it into a national envelope, it would actually complicate things more than make it, you know, more readily available and easy for us to do a lot of the things that we want to do that are being discussed here today. So when you talk about like collaboration and stuff like that, and the idea of like knowing where everything actually is, because the one thing that seems to me is that when we talk about underground information, it's if you don't see it, you don't think about it. And a lot of people think about it that way. And so when you look at it from our properties to the, you know, the road where our property ends, like the municipal side of it comes into play, but we're only collecting information up to my property line. But really, there's a network of information there that is actually tied together that all affects everything. Like everything's connected all the way down right to the start of it, right? So basically, what we've done is we've taken it on as a voluntary perspective to for Public Works being the largest property asset owner within the government, to take on our properties right now, create a directive and a standard and guidelines basically for how we want to capture this information all the way down from construction through to the collection and storage of the data is what it is. And so we've actually been pretty fortunate. I know you were talking there before about how difficult it could be to work in the government sometimes, because there are a lot of players that are in the game and it becomes very complex about who you're talking to and how they understand the concept of what you're talking about versus how you understand the concept of what's going on. And we've been pretty fortunate lately. I think that in the past 2 years since at least the National Capital Area had started sort of a pilot project to join into Ontario One Call to see how the notification system would work with national property or Crown-owned properties within the National Capital Area, we've been fairly successful. It's actually identified a lot of things that we wouldn't have identified without going through the process. And so we're understanding the relationship better between the constructor, the excavator, the project managers and stuff like that. And it's actually helping us to build a more robust system and procedure that we put in place for collecting our information. So going forward, like we have had a lot of success doing this. And so we're passing it down to each of our regions now. And all of our regions own various capacities and types of data. And this is why I say that the national overview of the legislation would not necessarily work, because in each of our provinces, we all end up with the same piece of information, but how we get there is very different sometimes. And so if we're regulated into doing something across the board, it's not going to work. It's going to get a lot of collisions and with ideas and how to do it. So basically where we're at right now is we've got it across the country now. A PSPC is represented at all of the one call centers. So we're all members within those groups. We're providing our information to them. We're interacting with the construction and excavators and giving them the information they require in order to do their work. Our hope is that this is also going to build upon the repository of that missing information, you know, the stuff that we don't necessarily know that's there, but we really require it. And that's just location based, and moving forward, we're hoping to build on for the quality of data. So it's not just accuracy, it's like more information. I want to know what kind of pipes in that ground. I want to know what size it is. And I want to know, you know, when was it last serviced, kind of thing. And so we're building slowly towards that stuff. And so each of our regions, after doing an inventory of all their stuff, like we found lots of gaps in sort of what we had. And when I mean gaps, it's not necessarily missing information, it's the format of information. I'm sure everybody here is relatable to, you know, that paper copy that was from 1952 that was, you know, it's been floating around and someone's been sketching on it like occasionally from time to time to say, hey, yeah, we changed this. So we're really pushing for that digital format of data. We want to get away from like the whole idea of getting a paper copy as built from somebody anymore, and start using a lot of the newer technology that's out there, like is what it is. And from my personal perspective and being from the federal government, everybody might not agree with it, but I do think that we need like a single format of how we disseminate and control this information across the board. Because in Ottawa in particular, if anybody's been to Parliament Hill, there's actually 3 or 4 different entities that control that area, have stuff in the ground. And for the amount of construction and development they want to do, you could understand how much clash detection has to go on. There's so much in the ground, there's so much congestion that we're talking about like taking up vertical space now. Like they're looking for vertical profiles to add stuff to. So but it's evolving, and it's actually going much better than anybody would imagine for like a government run project.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, Jennifer. I might just also jump in to do a bit of a couple of comments as well, in part because my former colleagues, I forgot to introduce myself actually, Prashant Shukle. I used to run the Canada Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation. And in that, we did it was the ultimate job for anybody that likes toys ranging from satellites to handheld and all of the data formats and approaches in between. And one of the things that we had put in place was a geospatial platform, and my colleagues at working on the federal geospatial platform would be rather upset if I didn't mention the opportunity for a linkage with respect to a lot of the opportunities in terms of location data and synthesizing location data. And I think my former colleagues in the Surveyor General would be remiss to not ask this question is, in your particular project, or how you're conceiving of things, are Crown lands and on reserve in scope for this type of an initiative, or are you thinking those are out of scope?
At the moment, they're out of scope. What we're doing is engagement with other OGDs, so other government organizations and departments. So Public Works is taking on the task of creating the directive and standard and guideline that's going to be submitted to Treasury Board. And from that set of documents, it's going to be regulated so that those other large property holders have guidance to go by in order to sort of establish the same type of repository of information. So right now we're working small, and then we're going to kind of push out as we go along. Like we said, one of the things that we've noticed is that like if you push something too fast and with too much like vigor, then you start losing people. People drop off and they're not as interested and they don't get engagement. So we're kind of taking it at bits and pieces at a time, learning from our mistakes, kind of making our changes. And so before this is fully established, we'll have like more of a concrete, doable solution for everybody that won't cause them a lot of disruption to their current operations. And that's one of the big things, is that people do not like change. And so if you can implement it at a reasonable rate so that they can grasp the concept and incorporate it into their operations, then you'll have better success. And that's the thing, we're going for success in this. We don't want this to fail. It's going to be established as it is, but we don't want people to be, whiny and moany because we're making them do this. You've been told to, you get slapped on the hand, and it's not what our intention is. Our intention is to have everybody come in and fully engaged and understand that it's really for the better of all, because it is, like everybody said, their scope of work, time, and cost is all going to go down based on these things. There's only improvements that can be made. We can't, it can't get worse than what we are.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that. Neil, before bringing you in, Jennifer had made a comment about the density of the underground environment in the Parliament Hill district in Ottawa. And I seem to recall major issues with respect to the underground infrastructure in around Heathrow costing the UK government untold X amount of pounds in not just delays in time and energy and effort, but the cost to the contractors with respect to the cut infrastructure and broken infrastructure, and overall just project delays, as well as the inconvenience to citizens in terms of the ongoing delays around Heathrow. Is that part and parcel what prompted the Geospatial Commission to look at the underground registry? And so what was the genesis in the UK, and how have you addressed a lot of these issues that Alon, Gord, Rob, and Jennifer have spoken about?
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. It's first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite. So yeah, the genesis of the NUAR project is very much around the safe excavation process. That has been our, very much our focus. And there are, of course, arising from that, there are, of course, other efficiencies around. It's around the planning of excavations and the length of excavation works and site orientation. But everything really arises from that safety angle, the safe excavation angle, and there is the main focus of that is of course the threat to life and limb, arising from utility incidents, but there is of course a broader economic impact of incidents, and there's been a lot of very good work done in the UK, for instance, at the University of Birmingham around the broader societal costs of utility damages. Is suggesting the broader costs are up to perhaps 29 times the cost of direct repair. So that so the real focus is safety, but we realise there are knock-on benefits arising from that as well. And I think it's important to note that the NUAR project, the National Underground Asset Register project that we're running in the UK, it is initiated by the Geospatial Commission, which is part of the Cabinet Office at the heart of government. But it's important to note that this isn't just a top-down project. The important thing is that the work that has been undertaken so far is very much based on regional initiatives that were already in place. So this was very much a case of a coincidence of kind of a top-down interest in digitalization in general and specifically around geospatial data, but also bottom-up initiatives by actual asset owners and the organizations involved in working on and maintaining our buried asset networks. And so there's real industry drive for a simpler and more efficient process around exchanging data, because the the safe excavation process in the UK is underpinned by various pieces of legislation and guidance, and obtaining plans about buried assets is one part of that, alongside all the other things around site survey, ground investigation, safe excavation practices, etc. And that obtaining of plans can be a challenging process. It can be rather inefficient. There's lots of good practice out there, and there are commercial services available which help to bring this information together. But the practices in place at the moment they're not comprehensive. They don't bring everything together, and the data which is delivered is generally quite inconsistent. In terms of scale and content, it can be quite difficult to bring together and interpret in the field, especially. And the real strong message from the asset owners and the people at the sharp end, responsible for maintaining the assets, is that a simpler approach is needed, and simpler, but also comprehensive, standardized, interactive. These were all the messages that were coming from the field. So it's really important to note, I think, that while this is driven from government, this is very much picking up on a bottom-up requirement. Listening. It's listening to the people who are actually doing this work and and their requirements. That's where NUAR came from. We've recently completed pilot work so that's been within 2 regions within the UK, and we are proceeding to commercial procurement exercise to actually build this platform, and the surrounding services. But yeah, that the key thing there, I think, is the real laser focus on a particular use case, which is safe excavation, and listening to what the people on the ground are telling us.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I'm not sure that I'd like to. There we are. So if we have any questions, I'd like to invite panelists, the panelists to respond to specific questions that come in. I'll read out the questions as they come in. I also have a couple of prompts that I'd like to find out a little more of, with respect to how we can create some momentum in Canada and how we can support the efforts of Jennifer and Alon and Gord in terms of moving the yardsticks. So this is for Jennifer, Gordon, and Alon. Neil's just outlined what is happening in the UK. It's very impressive that they do have a pipeline into the UK cabinet through the Geospatial Commission. And as a result of that, it's almost as if this becomes part and parcel of a national geospatial strategy, which is endorsed by people that sit around a cabinet table. At least I'm assuming that, Neil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, with prime ministerial impact as well as receptivity. What will it take for us to do something like that in the UK? I know, Jennifer, you're starting small, putting the blocks into place. Gordon and Alon, you in Ontario, you seem to have some big chunks together. And how do we make this more real in Canada? And I'll just turn it over to you three at this point for your thoughts on that. I'll start with Alon.
Sure, sorry. Thank you. So one of the things that resonated with me in listening to both Jennifer and Neil is that we're finally taking into consideration the additional dimension. It's not just height, width, and length anymore, but it's time and the value of data based on time and how to manage that, the freshness of the data based on time, and building a universal model to collect that data and manage it so that it is fresh and it is relevant, because again, it goes beyond mission criticality and beyond just economical value. I was particularly interested in some of the things that Neil mentioned as well, because I just recently returned from 3.5 years in the UK, working with the largest water utility in the UK and focused almost entirely on both their metering and their infrastructure. And their physical infrastructure is based on 15-year plans split into chunks of 5. But between all that, there's a constant management of either difficult or undetectable leaks under the ground. And so there is an enormous amount of focus and incentive around identifying those leaks, because every drop of water saved is a drop of water gained. And so much so that Ofwat, the regulator, is developing innovations fund to support some of these initiatives, like the ones I hear Neil speaking to. So what I think is that if we can bring some of that communication capability to the general public to help everyone understand how critical and valuable this universal knowledge of where things are and when they became that within underground and above where we come into conflicts, then I think that we could turn things around and accelerate these programs. For now, some of our biggest challenges have been awareness and managing issues to protect reputation of both projects, to serve the public, obviously, and instill that doing the right thing mentality. And I think a lot of that is coming from the efforts around collaboration versus policing and sheriffing regulation. Of course, those fences are there. They make good neighbors, but the relationship between the neighbors, these collaborating companies and organizations, is really what's driving it forward. I think Gord probably has a lot more to say about that and other areas as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I noticed Jim's comment just popped up around 250, and why not make it a standard? And Jim, you'll be happy to know that it is a standard with respect to broadband, and it is a standard with respect to our transit legislation. The Building Transit Faster Act and the Building Broadband Faster Act in Ontario both specifically designate C250 as a standard for collecting, depicting infrastructure information. And I look, it's one of the things that Neil mentioned around the work that the University of Birmingham is doing reminded me that work that Alon and his team are doing on our behalf with the University of Waterloo and the Center for the Advancement of Trenchless Technology to do both a qualitative assessment on our new utility coordination regime, but also the quantitative value. And if I think I remember this right, Neil, you mentioned it's the impact or the potential value is 29 times, I think you said, the actual cost of repair. There's been a number of studies done. Purdue University, University of Toronto here locally has looked at the value of subsurface utility engineering without looking at the societal benefits, I believe, just direct project cost benefits. And so we're hoping to establish that this regime that we've developed here in Ontario is in fact leading class, and something that we can reassure ourselves that there's little else to be done to improve outcomes and manage the risk transfer model. But but also that we're able to point to those benefits quite clearly, both direct and indirect benefits, as to the rationale. And look, we hope, and certainly early signs are that industry sees the value. They see the value in industrializing the process work. Alon and his team painstakingly developed process maps and workflows for every aspect of the project, from beginning of life through to revenue service, from the original conception and pre-design right through to when we start having riders on transit systems. Every aspect of that is mapped and has been coordinated with all the different players and stakeholders in the process. And through that, I think it was an interesting approach. One, it got very good clarity and transparency around what, how do we all coordinate together, and getting everybody aligned on that, which was the first time we had done that as an industry here. But it also allowed everybody to put their handprint on the process. And there was a fair amount of buy-in with respect to that. And there was give and take along the way for all the stakeholders. Now, recognizing that the legislation only applies to projects that are designated by the government as being of significance to the government. This isn't an industry standard as of yet. But what we're hearing is that some of our utility partners recognize the value in having, look, everyone hates to be held account, especially when their performance suffers. There's nothing more embarrassing, but this window, provides a view both in and out. And so they recognize that the transparency and accountability that's being expected of them is similarly expected of the builders and designers and ultimately the owners of these infrastructure projects, which in this case is the government of Ontario. And so it puts an accountability back on us as owners and developers to behave the same way we expect our utility partners and builders to behave. And so I think that's refreshing. And I think what we're hearing now is that while the rules are there and those backstops are important to keep people at the table and keep them engaged and motivated, and the process work was very engaging and very intimate and got into everybody's, how everybody functions as organizations. What they're starting to, and we're hoping to spell out the benefits through this work that the University of Waterloo is doing, but people are starting to see the benefits in rationalizing around an approach. And we're starting to see or hear from utility partners, well, we understand this approach is only applicable from a legislative perspective on these projects. We don't really want two treatments for finding and protecting and or moving utilities. Let's just agree to an approach. And if this is the approach that needs to be is legislated, I don't want to train my engineers internally to work two ways. Let's just agree that this regime. So it would be great for these approaches to be industrialized across all our infrastructure projects in the province. But it would also be great if we saw interest from other geographies, and not just in Canada, abroad. And so that's part of why Alon and I have reached out to people like yourself, Prashant, and Jeff, and others to make sure that there's an opportunity for us to share and collaborate, to hear. It's great to hear, from people like Neil and Rob. It's also like the last presentation from Jim, super insightful and educational for us. And we hope that being able to share what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we hope the outcomes to be spark an interest in folks like Jennifer, who can help to share the word. And as she's talking with, one call organizations or its members across the country, talk about, have you seen what Ontario's doing with their legislative measures on their linear projects and how they work with one call and its members to improve utility coordination? And have you looked at those approaches and might they work for you? Not expecting anybody to do a copy paste, but I expect there's a lot of what we've done that would be of value.
Well, that's a lot there, but in terms of what both you and Alon have said, I think it was interesting. Holger Kessler made the comment, Jennifer, that have we ever thought of bringing various ministers of different jurisdictions together to actually have a sit down or a chat? And seemingly Ontario seems to be a little bit further ahead based on my limited knowledge. Is there at least an opportunity to maybe think about getting, I know your minister is currently involved in vaccine procurement, and so she's probably got her hands full. But is there some thought being given to getting ministers at the same table from different jurisdictions?
I can't speak entirely to that. I know that our minister has been made advised as to what we're doing and the direction that we're going in. Obviously, it's not the highest profile subject that she has going these days, but they're definitely aware of what's happening within the ministerial office. I know that we've been a part of briefing notes, and we do brief ADMs and stuff like that on everything that we do. So they're aware of everything that's in place right now. In terms of like a lot of the stuff that Gord and everybody was saying, in terms of going forward with a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about and how this has changed over the last little while with, like, you know, how is this appearing and how is it moving forward and whatnot. The one thing that I've noticed, that the awareness of the actual underground infrastructure and how it affects like everybody, I think that's becoming more aware. Like we're getting a better sense in our environment, like that we've kind of done the awareness thing. Like it's exactly, we were bottom up and we're working our way to the top kind of thing. And so we've been giving it a lot of awareness and stuff like that with regards to like how it is that we need all of our project managers to interact, what they need to include in their contracts. And this all goes back to like our guidelines stipulate, you know, the S250 standards and stuff like that. Like you should be collecting your information to this degree. I'd noticed somebody in the comments was making a comment about the sub-utility engineering, you know, sign-offs, and then the sub-utility mapping sign-offs. I know in Canada that there have been discussions at the S250 level there with regards to who really is responsible for signing off on that information sometimes, because really sub-utility mapping, it's survey-based information, and surveyors are not the same as engineers by any respect. And so engineers design and they create. Mapping is, we're really focused on the location and how the information was picked up. So is that something that needs to be addressed? Because I know the Canada land surveyors have put their sort of 2 cents into the conversation. And I think that they think that, well, if they feel, and rightfully so, that if somebody's going to sign off on the accuracy of a location, it shouldn't be an engineer, because that's not their area of expertise. So we're learning, like, you know, subject matter experts is what we are when we talk about a lot of the stuff that we're going on to today. And we're trying to disseminate this to people who are not fully encompassed and engrossed in everything that we do. And so it really is an awareness campaign and building that knowledge as we go forward. And it's all the stuff like Gord was talking about with, like, you know, the utility providers and the legislation. You know, we legislate for one thing, but we don't for another. I'd rather do this. And it's on a collaborative level that they're doing that. And so that's sort of where we're at. And moving forward, like with other ministries and stuff like that, I think that nothing's off the table. I think that we're open to the idea of extending this out and having those collaborations. It's at what point are we all ready to do that? And so I don't know if the federal government is really at the point right now where we want to get fully involved in that. But I think at some point in the near future that we will be seeing that kind of engagement. Like I said, if you look at where our properties are in the urban centers and stuff like that, like we really should have more engagement with the municipalities and any other provincial entities that have any utility information in that area, because that should be shared information. Like we should be able to know where all of their stuff is and where all of our stuff is, because it does impact all of our projects at some point or another. If somebody wants to put in new fiber optic for a building, they have to put a new duct bank in. Well, they're going to have to coordinate and collaborate with all these groups anyways. And so if we were able to put it all into a single platform at some place where the data was in a single format, so it was readable and usable by all of us, so we didn't have to try and mesh it all together based on my CAD, his microstation, their ArcGIS, then it would make more sense, right? And so, but the buy-in is higher than us. I think that's the thing. What we're doing here right now is showing the value of the information that we're collecting and why it is that we need to be able to share it and collaborate with everybody. And so when we go back to our higher departments and leaders and stuff like that, that we have the support for it based on this.
That's there's some really interesting threads, and it reminds me of a book that I just read in large part because he was a former chief scientist of mine on the RadarSat Constellation mission, a fellow by the name of Vern Singroy, who has just edited a book called Advances in Remote Sensing for Infrastructure Monitoring. And it talks very much along in a similar way about how remote sensing is being used to monitor surface infrastructure. And if there's a common platform to share the surface and the subsurface, it might provide you with additional allies in this move forward that are spaced across the federal government, and certainly in the geospatial community. I see Karsten Ronstarf is on the list of names that I have in front of me, and I know the Open Geospatial Consortium is thinking about all these standards and how to put them together. And it leads me to turn to Rob and say, you know, Rob, we Canadians have still got a mentality about us that's not quite fully mature in some senses in our own self-image of ourselves. And anytime the UK or the United States does something, we sit up and take notice, particularly at the government level. So I guess I'm asking more out of a sense of hopeful exuberance that you guys have plans to take this up to the next level in the federal system, and have you got any plans around that? Are there things that are afoot with the Biden administration?
Well, very, very valid and very good question. You know, right now it's very localized to our state, but we do have ongoing conversations with the Federal Highway Administration that has a vested interest, obviously, in utility and underground utilities, and we have a network of DOTs that collaborate also on the same subject, because as you can imagine, it's not just Colorado that faces these issues, it's all the other DOTs throughout the country. And so there is ongoing discussion and platforms that we meet with all those stakeholders to discuss what we're doing, what other states are doing. Is it, from the federal government level, they would probably like to see a one fix, one stop shop for all DOTs, but it's really more right now. It's just those lead states are trying to help, and we're trying to whittle our way through it as well and muck our way through it, just like folks in Canada. We're still working out some of the bugs, but it is taking traction. We're getting more notice from the federal government side. At this point, there hasn't been a plan to put forth just a standard throughout the country that's based on Colorado or California or Minnesota or whatever those states are doing. I think over time, though, I think best practices probably will come together, and it will be shared out with those DOTs around the country, and they'll be able to decide how they want to implement, because all the conversation I've heard here is so valid. And as far as implementation, how do you get through that process of implementing the legislative side to the process side to the end users that are out there providing feedback to the agency? So there's all these different pieces that fall into that implementation phase, and it's definitely a challenge to get them all to work in concert. So,
well, that is some really interesting feedback that I think we need to take into account as we move forward. Joel Shukle has indicated that perhaps with the increased focus on environmental issues, there will inevitably be more attention to the methane gas release from gas utility strikes, water and environmental damage from utility strikes, and other types of items. And with so much value to utility owners and project owners, what if there was a payment to excavators for providing utility as-built and utility uncovered data? Fascinating thing, fascinating way to monetize that data. And I'll turn to Alon and Gord if we have enough time, but I want to give a final sort of question to Neil. Having heard what you've heard in the North American context, and given that the Canadian system of government is very much a Westminster form of government like the UK, what, if any, would be your advice for us in terms of the path forward? If you were to do something differently, what are the key things that you would do differently in getting the new R up and running?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand, the role of government here, I guess. I think certainly in the UK, there's been many attempts in the past for this, one-stop shop and this simplified process. And I think when we're talking about sharing data, there are always two ends to that pipe. The consumer and the supplier, and they're often in the same different people in the same organization. I think the case on the consumption side, one place to get standardized data, I think we're pushing it an open door there. Everyone can see the value of that. Everyone wants that. The complications come when you come to the supply side, I guess, and certainly in the UK, previous initiatives have founded on questions of security and sensitivity and commercial considerations, and also this idea that the societal impact of those inefficiencies and certainly incidents that they're not owned by an individual organization. So it's very difficult for individual organizations to drive improvement there. So it's just really understanding where are these areas where government can make a difference and kind of unlock those blockers. So I'd say that's really important. And it's never too early to bring in analysts and economists in terms of I've spoken a lot about listening to the people who are at the sharp end, and that is really important. But I think in terms of feeding that message upwards, get that business case lined up as early as possible, and that's often what focuses minds a bit more as you go up. In terms of what we would have done differently, maybe added 8 more hours to each day, and that would have been useful. But I think I'm sure there are lots of things, but I think in general we do very much subscribe to the agile process, and when the inputs change, we change what we do. So I would like to say that we're learning what we're doing wrong on a very tight cycle on that micro level and adjusting that all the time. And I think that's really important, because if the people on the ground are telling you you're not doing the right thing to help them and to keep them safe, then you need to listen to that and you need to change what you're doing. So I'm sure there are bigger things we could have done differently, but I would say in general we try and keep a very tight eye on that and adjust as we go. So yeah.
Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes left based on what I see in terms of the schedule. And does anybody want to take the question of payment to excavators for providing utility as built and utility uncovered data? Is that something we should be considering? Alon, Gord?
Well, I won't speak specifically to that, but we are, in our broadband legislation, we are including a pay for delay and pay for mislocate provision that would hold those who are obligated to provide locates responsible for providing timely and accurate locates, so that those who are relying on those locates for design or construction activities can do so with confidence. And to the extent that those locates are delivered in a way that harms projects from proceeding or requires a significant redesign as a result of the quality of the locates, there would be a consequence to that. So it's not exactly the same as holding the excavator to account for, you know, emissions, although that's an interesting idea. You know, there is an accountability that we're looking to introduce. And look, I just might just want to close off by saying, and I hope that Neil and Rob would agree with me, that while the projects that we're putting this legislation behind are very much a government policy decision, I would hope that the idea of building infrastructure more quickly, reducing the risk to project delays and costs, and reducing the risk to life and loss of property damage is not a partisan issue. It's not an issue exclusively owned by the UK, the US, or Canada. These are, you know, these are international and national issues that we all struggle with. And regardless of your political affiliation, I would hope that, you know, whether we decide to build transit or highways or broadband or not, that when we do commit to building those projects, we do it in a way that ultimately saves our communities as much money as possible and gets that most of that infrastructure investment back into actually building infrastructure, as opposed to paying damages because of delays or cost increases. That's what we hope. And you know, I know I've dumbed down the idea of politics to a simple statement, but and I know that statement probably applies on a whole bunch of policy files, but certainly for infrastructure, I hope that it's not a partisan issue, that we just do a better job.
Well, on that note, I think, Gord, what you've done is you've certainly you haven't dumbed it down. What you've given us is a sense of aspiration and hope and what politics should be about. Not partisanship, but politics. And I think that the two are fundamentally different. And with that, I'd like to thank you all, colleagues, for indulging me and offering me the opportunity to sit amongst you. You brought some absolutely tremendous insights, and for me, you're on the vanguard of a very exciting initiative. And I certainly hope to the participants that have been listening in that we can count on your support as we try to build momentum to try to get this initiative launched more broadly in Ontario, and support Gordon and Alon in their activities, and certainly support Jennifer in her efforts within the federal government. And Rob and Neil, we're going to have to sign off by looking to you guys and saying we hope that the UK and the US are able to provide a level of inspiration for us, and that you know, we'll be able to, as we work inside, we'll be able to say to others, look what these guys are doing, and maybe that'll incent people to want to do what others are doing. With that, Gavin, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much,
everyone.
Thank you,
Neil and Jennifer and Rob and Gord and Alon. So this panel brought up a really good point about the policy, or for an individual jurisdiction or an entity or agency that has jurisdiction over some properties, like the Crown properties, or in Colorado, it's the state right-of-ways, or in a city, or a functional entity like Heathrow Airport. This is where it can begin to be mandated, but we got to remember why the hesitance to do as-builts, why people do the bare minimum, why they're completely left out of contracts as-builts, was that it can impact construction costs not insignificantly in the past. Well, those excuses are going away. As we've seen today, the technologies and the methods that are making it, well, there's less of an excuse. It's not going to impact construction costs as much as it used to. And that, I think, could have something to do with some of the positive movement in the policy. Standards really has to catch up. I noticed a lot of the presenters and the people on the panel talked about, we need a simplicity. It's easier to sell a simplicity that is at the same time comprehensive. So that's a tough call. But the standards folks, US, UK, internationally, are on that. I'm going to call Jeff Zeiss back for his closing comments. You know, we're going to reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. bright and early. Well, it is for me. I'm 3 hours behind. But Jeff, your thoughts on this? Jeff's the zeitgeist behind this forum, and somebody a lot of folks in North America look to and internationally on matters of underground. So Jeff, take it away, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I thought that was a really excellent summary you gave, because I think you captured the essence of what we learned today. And I want to thank some folks. I want to thank our speakers in particular. I mean, these were really outstanding talks about different aspects of underground infrastructure, and I think it really gave everybody a feel for where the technology is, where legislation and regulation are now. And Prashant, thank you very much for that really provocative panel, getting people involved, talking about what we're currently doing and what we potentially could do, and how what we're doing in Canada may relate to what's going on in the UK and the US. There's some other folks I'd like to thank as well who really made this possible. First, John Murphy, who came up with the idea of an underground forum in the first place. He came to me and said, "Do you think we should do something like this?" And I think he really made the whole thing possible, and he's been very supportive through the whole process of getting speakers and getting things online and so on. Second person is Tessa Lavoie, who's been the technical person behind this. I think this is the smoothest conference online conference I've ever been in. You know, on other ones, there's issues with somebody can't get their video going, or their microphone's broken or something like that. This one has just really gone incredibly smooth. So I want to thank Tessa for that. Gavin, of course, just for being the MC this afternoon. I think he's just so perceptive in understanding the issues and being able to summarize them. And you know, he's a practicing field guy. So I mean, he really knows what we're talking about when we talk about we don't know where things are on the underground. There's some other folks that I want to mention as well. Ophir Vayner has been incredibly helpful in making contact with some of the speakers you heard today. You know, it's often difficult for one person to know everybody, or to know everybody well enough that they can invite them to something like this and expect that they're going to be positive in response. So Ophir was incredibly helpful in arranging contacts with some of the speakers that you've heard today. Paul Churcher, who's at D&D, has also been very helpful in arranging contacts with some of the speakers that you've heard today, and also some of the speakers that you're going to hear tomorrow. So I really want to thank Paul for that. Gord McElravy has been supportive through the whole thing. He put together the schedule, has kept track of who's doing what and who's speaking when, and whether they've submitted this and submitted that. It wouldn't have been possible to do this without Gord. So I want to thank those people for helping make this all possible. And I'll just mention that the keynote tomorrow, if you're, you know, this whole area of inertial or gyro mapping is really getting a lot of attention these days. The fact that you can put a little gyro mapping device in a 2-inch live gas line and map up to hundreds of meters where that line is, and you know, to high accuracy, is really a remarkable technical achievement. And Otto Ballantyne from Reduct, who are the guys who developed that technology, will be our keynote tomorrow morning. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. EDT, same time.